Welcome to Rise Leaders Radio. I'm your host, LeeAnn Mallory. As a leadership coach, I work inside organizations and I focus on helping leaders achieve their whole person potential and meaningfully contribute to their organization's mission. With this podcast, I share leadership best practices, developmental approaches, and stories of exemplary leaders. Welcome, everyone, to episode 28. This is an episode on the coaching ecosystem. Really, in your organization, how do you set up coaching so that it's a really great experience and you get a fantastic return on your investment as an organization? I have a confession to make. This episode is being redone. I had recorded it solo. It had been edited, sent back to me. I listened to it. I didn't like it. And so I told Jerry, who I'm sitting here with today, and he offered me a lifeline. So here we are sitting in Jerry's beautiful backyard. It is a Sunday afternoon, bluebird skies. You might hear some planes in the background or a dog barking, or hopefully no one turns on their leaf blower while we're out here. But I want you to imagine that you're just sitting at the table with Jerry and I as we're having this conversation. And first, I just want to say hello and welcome and get your voice here.
Thanks so much. I'm just as happy as I can be to be with you today.
Yeah, it's really great to be looking into your eyes and sitting across the table from you with a cup of tea. And before we get started, I want to say a few things about my friend Jerry. So imagine that you're sitting at the table with this kind of person. So Jerry, as I said, is a dear, dear friend and a very admired colleague. So someone I admire a lot. He works in the space of leadership development as well, mostly on the organization side. And when it comes to facilitation skills, he's known in our circle as maybe the best, at least, he's turning red, at least in the top 3 of facilitators of organization effectiveness, workshops, consulting, etc. And Jerry, say what your primary focus is.
Well, like everyone else, pivoting.
Right.
And interestingly, for us, we're making changes, but as a leadership development consultant and facilitator, I'm really primarily right now focusing on helping organizations and leadership teams transition in these turbulent times and adapt to change and all those types of things. So,
and I bet you're busy.
Yes, like sitting in my office staring into Zoom.
Right, right. Again, we are outside. We are socially distanced here, and so it's great to be in person. And thank you again so much for offering your hand. You were, like I said, my phone a friend, and so I sent Jerry kind of the topic that I wanted to talk about, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to interview you." So I'm just going to toss it over to you now.
Yeah, because we are turning the tables on you today, aren't we?
Yes.
What does it feel like to be on the other side of the questions?
Well, it feels, at this point, it feels relieving because I have a sense that this is going to be a much better episode because you're interviewing me rather than me just talking into a microphone by myself. And hats off to all of the people out there who do podcasts and who are just solo. I have not mastered that.
Well, I'm just excited to have a conversation with you, really, and what a kind introduction you had. And I'm going to return the favor because this is all so true. So, while you and I do the same thing around the leadership development facilitation, I don't do coaching, and because of that, I have referred people to you throughout the years, and overwhelmingly, I mean, just every single client comes back with saying 3 things about you. They say, I love LeeAnn, and they say the experience was amazing, and they say it really made a difference. And so those 3 things really speak to you, the person. They speak to your ability to create a relationship with people, and not just a relationship, but one that generates results in the real world. And so I'm really excited to get to pull back the curtain and see what's behind your thinking a little bit on coaching.
Yeah. We're going to be focused today. These ideas have been percolating for a while. There's a whole part of coaching that has to do with the client and the coach and what we do together and what the coach, what we're pulling out of our hat and all of that. And when we're working in organizations, there's a whole other set of things that need to be in place. I call it an ecosystem that really supports the success of the client. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. And so I didn't want to give up on the episode because I didn't like the way it turned out. But so I think that's important.
Well, and I think to me, you as the coach, and the integrity that you bring to the process is to say these are the standards and these are the criteria that we need to have in place. And if we have anything less than that, we're going to generate results that aren't what you're looking for. And there are a lot of people who will say yes to anything.
Right.
And so what I hear you really getting into is the criteria and the standards by which you want to engage with your clients. Yeah,
and I'm becoming more and more willing to say no when those things aren't there, because I think that it ends up being not a good use of the organization's resources, both their financial resources and their their time. And it becomes very frustrating for people. And so I've actually started declining when these things aren't there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think about the evolution of coaching in the last 20 years or so, and what's your take on, through the lens of this ecosystem idea versus where things were earlier in the world of coaching?
Well, I think, first of all, every coach is very different. I work better in a more structured environment, so I do bring that in. But if I back up a little bit and even say that, when I first started this, 20 or so years ago, that coaching was seen as a mixed bag. So sometimes if a client or if an organization had used coaching primarily to close performance gaps, so people who were, quote, in trouble were the ones that got coaching, then no one wanted to tell anyone that they were getting coached, because it's like, oh, I've been bad, I need to be fixed. But what's happened over the years is that organizations have seen coaching as a really great way to invest in key leaders. It's expensive, and so you're not going to invest in everyone, and certainly not a new leader. They're doing their work, just getting their legs underneath them in the beginning. But it is seen more and more as a strategic development plan. So really to focus it on the people who have really great potential in the organization. And so that view of coaching, I think, has changed.
It has, hasn't it? It is so funny when you said that. You reminded me that back in the late 90s, people wouldn't even have their coach on site. They would slurk off into the somewhere else to have the meeting. And now it's almost a badge of honor to have a coach.
Yes.
And to be, what do you think about that idea? That people will, I met with my coach, and are you coaching? Do you have a coach? I have a coach.
Yeah, I have to be careful because I think probably 75-80% of the people are in that bucket, and there are still people who are just really private. I always want the client to take the lead on if they want other people to know that they've got a coach, because it ultimately it's their choice. And so it's not 100%. So
sure. Well, tell me, who are the typical clients that reach out to you, and where are they in their career at that point?
Well, like I said, it's expensive, and both from a time and a financial standpoint. And so it's usually people at least midpoint in their career, and people who are mostly they're getting to the next level. So there are some basic categories, but before we go into those categories, I want to talk about some context. And so if I say the categories are typically like succession planning, so people who are getting ready for promotion, or someone who got a promotion and they're not feeling ready, so that's another category. Sometimes just high achieving leaders will ask for coaching, and then that last one is still the case where sometimes there are performance gaps. So those are the big categories. But the broader context is that as leaders are gaining more and more responsibility, their scope broadens, they're having to manage more complex relationships, more nuanced relationships, and even dealing with the chaos, as you were talking about, of the pandemic or whatever is going on. Leaders often find themselves in over their heads. That's a quote or there's actually a book by Bob Keegan called In Over Our Heads. And that's a good time to call on a coach, is that when you find yourself like, I'm in new waters and this doesn't make sense, and there's a higher expectation for some nuanced leadership. So balancing vision and strategy with the ability to build trust, manage relationships, develop your team. It's a lot that's expected. So that's underneath the request, but the request typically comes in those 4 categories.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about succession planning or planning for a promotion. A lot of times people know like 6 to 18 months out. What I find, those are a lot of times people that are going to step into the C-suite or the CEO role. So that's typically something that people know 6 to 18 months out that's going to happen. And they work with their leader to identify what skill sets they're going to need to make that transition. So that's the succession planning piece. Like, people know they're about to take on these responsibilities and they want to get themselves prepared. When they find themselves in a new position and they hadn't prepared for it, so that happens just as probably more often than the succession planning does, that they find themselves in these new positions, they have increased responsibilities. Oftentimes they're now managing their peers, people that used to work alongside of them, and they feel shaky. They don't quite have the confidence, and so they'll develop, they'll go into coaching for that. And then sometimes people are just high achieving leaders. So I've had people contact me that just say, I know I have some gaps, I know I have some blind spots, and I want to see what those are. A lot of times we'll pull in and we'll do a 360-degree assessment there. We'll bring other people into the mix there. And so it's not necessarily that they've got something specific that they're looking for as far as a position. They just know that they want to be bigger and better as a leader. Yeah. So those are 3. And then of course that 4th one we still get, which is performance gaps. So as you can imagine, as organizations are changing and leaders are getting more and more responsibility, there are bumps in the road as those leaders are developing those capabilities. There's no place in life that while we're progressing, we don't stumble and fall. And so sometimes people will get coaching that typically comes in the form of communication. How do they handle conflict? Are they able to build trusting relationships? Those performance gaps usually come in the interpersonal relationship space. And so those are the 4, going a little bit deeper into those 4 categories.
And it sounds like a couple of those categories are ones that are typically initiated by a leader. So the succession planning and the gap closing, and the other 2 seem to be kind of someone raising their hand and saying, ooh, I'd like to either just get better, or because I'm always trying to get better, or I'm feeling shaky and I need to get better.
Absolutely. That's true. And I think it's about half and half. Yeah. When I get a call, half the time it's from the organization looking for help for some or support for a leader, and the other half of the time it's the leader saying, I'm looking for a coach.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about, how do you see coaching in the broader arsenal of all, you and I live in this world of leadership development that includes workshops and all kinds of online learning and just all kinds of things. How do you see coaching fitting into that?
I think it's integral. I think that it's not an either or. I love the distributed aspect of workshops and group learning. I think it's super important, and it's culture building, it's relationship building, it's alignment producing. So there's no substitute for those times when leaders are in group settings, whether it's with their organizational cohorts or cohorts outside their organization, and they're hearing about how other people are doing things, and they're learning other lessons. So I think both are invaluable. I think they're integral to each other. What's your take on that?
From the side of the one who's doing most of the work in the classroom environment, one of the things that I have such an appreciation for on the coaching side is that it really drives the sustainability of this, and it drives the transfer of what we talk about in that room into reality, because people have to struggle with things, and they have to have some successes and some failures and then report back, and it seems like that's the perfect place for that to happen, is in the coaching relationship.
It is, and as you say that, more and more classroom settings are coupling one-on-one coaching with the classroom settings for the exact reason that you're talking about. So to make it more personal and more applicable and a little bit more sustainable. So absolutely, yes.
You know, if you're in just a leadership development program, and some of them, the numbers get pretty high, you can get lost. You can kind of
and you can check out
into it. But if there's a coaching component, that you're face-to-face now, virtually face-to-face, or whatever it looks like, there's a level of accountability that I just think is so critical to the development process.
I agree. I think they're a good complement to each other. So I wouldn't say it's either or, and not everybody who's in a group setting is going to get individual coaching, and vice versa. So I think they're both invaluable. Right. There's a place for both of them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about those four categories, and you think about someone who's reaching out, whether it's the boss or the organization that's reaching out, or someone's raising their hand and saying, I need help. You mentioned, as we kicked off our conversation, the idea of an ecosystem. Can you describe a little bit about what are the conditions that create the most success? Yep,
great question. First and foremost is a client who's willing and motivated and open. And if we don't get that pretty soon, most of the time it's there. But there are some times when the client just never agrees that they should be in coaching.
Right.
So these aren't the people that are calling. And if the client isn't willing, then we really don't have an engagement. And I typically gate my engagements for that reason.
Say more about what do you mean by gate?
Well, gating means that we have kind of milestones, and actually the first, and here's our background noise.
Yes.
The first gate is, do we have a willing client? The second gate will be, can we come to agreement on what we want the outcomes to be? And so that is often when the organization is involved, that is sitting down with the client and their boss and getting really clear about what we want the outcomes to be. And then I say about 8 weeks or so into the engagement, there's a natural checkpoint that says, how's this going? Do we want to keep moving forward? And most of the time the answer is yes, but it gives everybody an out to say, actually this isn't working, or we've changed our mind, or whatever. And so that's another gate. Yeah. And so I like to set it up that way.
I think that's wonderful, because again, to me, that speaks so much to the integrity of the process that you bring to the table, because so often there aren't gates. It's here's your contract. It's X number of months, and it's X number of dollars, and so we're in it. And what you're doing is you're saying, no, there are these moments of no fault, stepping away, and no harm, no foul, but let's have that conscious moment rather than having something fizzle out unconsciously.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of reasons why that is good to do. And, some of them are selfish. Selfishly, it is like slogging through mud to work with someone who doesn't want to be worked with.
Yeah.
Like they cancel their meetings, all of those things, and it's very unfulfilling, personally. And also, like, I don't want a reputation that I work with people and we don't make progress. And so there's also that. So there's there's the satisfaction part of that, and there's also the reputation. And I don't want to work with people that don't want to do the work.
Yeah, you want your clients to have succeeded.
That's the good gossip I want. Yeah. So there's that. So there's the client. There's the getting the alignment. There's also, I think, just support, general support around the client, meaning that the organization has faith in them, that they see that person as having potential, they see that person is willing to change, or that they've got what it takes to go to the next level. So we've got that ecosystem that is supportive, and clients know that. They know if they've got this support or not. And then I think the final piece of that is feedback. So part of that support, I think, is for them to get ongoing feedback. People are working really hard to make changes and to do things differently, and it's good for them to reach out to their colleagues and their boss and say, hey, here's what I'm working on. When you see me doing this, will you raise your hand and say, great job, I just saw you doing this thing and it was really helpful. And when it doesn't work, I want to know that too. So there's a whole ecosystem, I think, that can be in place to help make the leaders even more successful.
When you say that, particularly about the feedback piece, I think that in some ways this boss who has engaged you to engage with this person for whatever reason, if it's a gap issue or if it's a succession planning opportunity, it seems to me that the reality is their job is about to get a lot more intense because of what you just said, this feedback. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, because, and this actually kind of goes into when things don't work, so we can just kind of start pivoting into that as well.
Yeah.
So one of the derailers of coaching is that people aren't getting that feedback. So the role of the boss gets more intense because they are going to be not on the hook, but they're going to be asked to sit across from their direct report and let them know how it's going. Feedback is like facing conflict. We don't like to do it as human beings. It's not comfortable. And so that's part of their work too. And oftentimes in these check-in meetings that I do along the way, that's part of what we're doing, is that we're skill building around giving feedback and delivering hard news.
Yeah, and by the way, let me clarify this. When you say you're skill building, it's not just your coachee that you're skill building with, you're skill building with their manager, right?
Yes. So, right. And that's what I thought you meant when you said the boss.
And that's exactly right.
Yes. So, which sometimes happens too, or when it doesn't happen, I call that a punt or tossing something over the fence.
Right. What does that look like?
Well, early in my career, thank goodness, so I could recognize when it happened, I got hired to coach this woman. We have this checklist of all the things that we need to do before we usher someone out of the organization. And getting a coach was the last thing. Her manager really did not want anything to do with her anymore. He just wanted to, and that happens sometimes. You get these messages like, I've got this leader that I need to be fixed. And sometimes it's true that the leader does have a performance gap, but they're part of an ecosystem where they're not being given the feedback they need in order to improve.
Yeah.
So when I get a sniff that someone's trying to punt and just hand me this thing, I know it's not going to work. Right. And so back to what you're saying about the role of the boss, is that the boss needs to be included in that, giving the feedback and telling the truth. I mean, sometimes the person doesn't need to be coached. Sometimes they're not a good fit. Let's just say our blessings and let the person go and be successful somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But this idea of the boss who may or may not have done what they've needed to do to set them up for success, even in a succession planning process where it's kind of like they're about to move to the next level, and now we want you to help them get there. What I hear you saying is, you don't play that game. You say, no, I am a part of what is going to happen. And so bosses who want to maybe outsource that development are really setting the employee up for a failure if they're thinking in those terms, that you're going to create an opportunity for them to work with you to support that success.
Yeah. So that's also some magical thinking that, in these 6 months, which, the typical coaching engagement is 6 to 12 months, that in these 6 to 12 months, I'm going to just, I want you to wave a magic wand, and I just want this person to be delivered back with all of these amazing capabilities.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. How do you kind of give people the hard truth of that when you see some leader getting into magical thinking and they're not interested in being a part of the ecosystem? What's your experience with that?
I don't say that's magical thinking, but I just lay it out ahead of time that here's going to be the ecosystem that we're working within. And if you're willing to do these things, then we have an engagement. But if you're not, these are the expectations. Yeah. And I actually haven't had anybody say no to that. Actually, this is another thing that I think is a derailer, and I call it triangulating, where we have all of these meetings at the beginning, we all get on the same sheet of paper, but then I get a call from the boss saying, I want you to work with this person on X. Well, I don't have any knowledge of that. I haven't seen this behavior, or I don't know. So I can't bring something up to the client that the boss hasn't already spoken about. Yeah. And so that's a great time for us to huddle again and say, let's all talk about this new thing that's come up and we may be realigning our outcomes, et cetera. But that back door also doesn't work. And I always encourage ongoing communication all the time. But when it's something that wants to kind of slide in and say, hey, would you talk to this person about X? It's like, let's get on the phone and talk to them together about that.
Again, a moment of integrity that says everything that happens is going to be above board on the table rather than under the table, and some of these kinds of methods that are, frankly, it's not just in coaching, it's how most organizations like to communicate. Yes. And you're holding them to a higher standard than the norm is.
Yeah, so basically the back channeling, it's not going to work. Yeah. It's avoidance. So we know there's fight, flight, freeze, please. That's a flight. Yeah. And it is more magical thinking, and it just doesn't work. And while those conversations are hard, they're also exhilarating. When you get on the other side of something that's been avoided, typically what we see is that we were avoiding it for no good reason. That it was much easier conversation than we thought it was going to be, and it feels so good on the other side of it to know that we can have these kinds of conversations and still live. Yeah. We're still standing, we're still living, even after our body feels like we're going to die. Which is why we don't. Which is why we don't have the conversations.
Yeah. We are literally battling biology, aren't we?
We are literally battling biology, and it's a survival technique or survival system. And I think that that's also a place for us to be really generous with ourselves, to say, this is happening. I'm avoiding this conversation because I think I'm going to die. Yeah. I'm probably not going to die, and we need to have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, on the other side of that, it is fascinating that the net result is usually that trust has been built and the relationship is actually strengthened through that difficulty, rather than, we survived it. We actually gained something quite, and I love your word exhilarating. It's a great word for that, because it does what it does.
Is. That's how I feel anyway. When I get on the other side of a difficult conversation, there's a big exhale, and then there's this, I did it.
Yeah.
I can do it again. We just built a whole new level of our relationship through this conversation.
Yeah. Well, and everything you've been talking about through this concept of the ecosystem, it holds every part of it accountable. And that, to me, again, that's why I love the work that you do, and I love you. And I, without hesitation, can say LeeAnn is your person if you want some coaching, because the results that you generate or help people generate are based on the willingness to speak to every one of these pieces rather than let it slide or let it get sloppy. I keep using the word integrity, but there's I don't know what the opposite of sloppy is that fits here, but you don't let your work get sloppy, and I think there's something extraordinary about that.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. I haven't thought about it that way, but there is, and I think we all have this sense when things aren't going the way that we want, and we would say, oh, I'm not actually that proud of the work I'm doing right now, or it feels off. You know, if we pay attention, we get those signals. So I appreciate you saying that. When I get the dread or the something, I know, yeah, I need to kind of elevate this and see what's going on here.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, what I take away from that is, for people who are wanting to really lean into coaching as a way of growing, whether it's growing for yourself or whether you have an employee that you want to support, you have two things to look at. One is the coach that you're going to engage. Do they have the rigor and integrity that you just described? And are you willing to be a part of this ecosystem that you've just described that holds the whole thing together?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's exactly right. I love how you boiled that down. I couldn't have said that better. Thank you.
Well, I've loved my time with you, and the tea has been wonderful, and the environment has been.
I know. Our ecosystem really colluded with us and conspired to make this really work. Thank you very much, Jerry.
My pleasure.
If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Rise Leaders Radio on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings, reviews, and shares are also really appreciated. You can also visit rise-leaders.com for all the resources we talked about today and to work with me if you're committed to making your unique and positive impact. Thank you for listening, and remember, elevate your part of the world.